My family skipped my graduation for a ski trip, then called me 37 times demanding $4,800 for my brother. But I exposed him and ruined his future. My name is Rob, I'm 23 years old, and I've been the background child in my family since I can remember. Not the black sheep, but more like the unseen one. I was never the troublemaker, but neither was I the kid my parents brag about at dinner gatherings. That honor belongs to Daniel, my older brother. He's the golden boy. Charismatic, athletic, the type of person who can overlook someone's birthday and still make them smile at the conclusion of the talk. I was the quiet one, head buried in books, striving for accomplishments that didn't picture well on Facebook. Graduation day was supposed to be different. I'd worked for years to get here, endless late nights, part-time jobs, and extra hours to pay tuition gaps when scholarships weren't enough. I'd pictured that moment for years. The stage lights, my name being called, and my family in the audience roaring loudly enough for me to hear them over the applause. I even reserved them the nicest seats in the auditorium. But that morning I woke up to a text in the family group chat from my mother. "We won't be able to make it today. Something came up. We'll celebrate soon." I sat there staring at my phone for a solid minute, thinking it was some kind of sick joke. I scrolled up to see if they'd clarified, but the next message came from Daniel. "We're heading to Aspen for the week, totally last minute, can't wait." Mom responded a minute later with a series of skiing emojis. No apologies, no awareness that my college graduation, the first in our family, was in less than 4 hours. I didn't respond. I could not. My throat tightened, and the walls of my apartment seemed smaller. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they assumed my ceremony was later in the week, but they knew the date. I'd been discussing it for months. I issued them an official invitation from the institution, as well as a reminder, last week. They simply chose something different. I chose him. When I came to college, I tried to put it aside and concentrate on the present. Friends and classmates were present with their families, snapping photos, carrying flowers, and laughing in groups on the grass. I smiled when others praised me, but the pit in my gut continued to grow. Every time I looked toward the place where my family should have been, I only saw strangers. I persuaded myself it did not matter. I promised myself I'd remember the pride, not the empty chairs. Then my name was called. I stepped across the platform, shook hands, smiled for the photo, and then felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was my father. A text message said, "Come home immediately." There is no explanation, simply that. When I came off stage, I noticed the notifications piling up. We missed 37 calls. The same message was repeated, "Come home now." I did not respond. Instead, I stared at the screen, my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other, wondering what was so necessary that my family, who had skipped my graduation for a ski trip, now asked that I drop everything and rush home. And as I stood there in the midst of the crowd, the clamor of joy all around me, I felt something change inside. A cold, calm knowing that whatever was waiting for me at home was more than simply something coming up. This was the beginning of something bigger. I didn't realize it at the time, but that day would forever separate my family's past and present. And I was about to discover how far the schism would go. When I returned to my apartment that evening, still wearing my graduation gown because I hadn't bothered to change, I discovered 3 more missed calls from my father, and 1 from my mother. No voicemail, no explanation. Simply the same 2 words. Come home. I sat at my modest kitchen table, which I bought secondhand when I moved out, and stared at my phone. I didn't hear from any of them during the ceremony. There were no congratulations, no photo requests, and not even a text to acknowledge the event. They were now treating me as if I had arrived late for an emergency about which I was unaware. Mom's message arrived an hour later. "Your brother needs you. It's important." No context, no questions about my well-being or how the ceremony went, just straight to Daniel. I could practically hear the tone behind it, which was the same as I had grown up with. In our household, Daniel's difficulties were familial issues. Mine was mine. If Daniel scraped his knee, the world came to a halt until he could get a bandage and a bowl of ice cream. If I sprained my wrist at the gym, Mom urged me to walk it off because she was busy. I realized early on that my function in the family was not to be cared for, but to be useful when someone else, usually Daniel, needed anything. I did not respond right away. I set my phone down and headed to the fridge to get something to eat, only to discover I had been too busy studying for finals to adequately grocery shop. I poured myself a bowl of cereal and sat there, reflecting on how Daniel had eclipsed every big milestone in my life. My high school graduation, he'd been discovered having a big party the night before, so everyone was talking about how much trouble he'd gotten himself into. When I started my first job, he damaged his automobile that same day. So, instead of applauding me, everyone in the family group chat started talking about insurance claims. Around 9 p.m., my phone vibrated again. My dad made a video call. Against my better judgment, I responded. Dad's face filled the screen, his look tense and impatient. Rob, finally, we've been calling you all day. I was busy, I replied bluntly. Graduating. He did not even acknowledge it. Daniel is in trouble. He needs you to come over tonight. Now. I didn't see it. What kind of trouble? Dad groaned as if I were being unreasonable. His credit cards are maxed out, and he can't pay the balance. He was counting on you to help. I looked at him. He counted on me. I didn't even realize this until 10 seconds ago. You're good with money, Dad replied, as if that clarified everything. You've been working all through school, saving up. Daniel wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. My jaw was tightening. You skipped my graduation to go skiing, and now you're asking me to bail him out. It wasn't about skiing, Dad replied immediately. But I could see the ski lodge behind him in the video, with its wood-paneled walls and beautiful chandelier. Daniel had been stressed, and we thought the trip would help. You know, he's been under pressure lately, right? I said, my voice cold. And I guess I haven't been. Dad's demeanor changed, revealing that subtle flash of annoyance I'd seen my entire life. The unspoken message, don't make this about you. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall opposite my couch. They didn't only miss my graduation, it was expected that I would willingly set aside my own life to clean up after Daniel. It has always been like way. When he failed a class in college, I was forced to do his assignments for one semester. When he ran up a tab at a pub, I was guilt-tripped into paying it back because family sticks together. But nevertheless, family never stayed with me. 2 days later, I received another call. This time from Daniel himself. He didn't bother saying hi. Hey, so when are you bringing the money over? I'm not, I said. There was a pause, followed by a laugh. Come on. Don't be like that. You've always helped me before. Yeah, I said softly. And you've never once shown up for me. Not for my graduation, not for anything. Why should I help you now? He scoffed. Wow. So, you're going to hold a grudge over some ceremony? You're being petty. The term petty struck harder than it should have. When I spoke up for myself, they would always say the same thing. They saw my boundaries as overreactions, not boundaries. By the end of the week, I'd received texts from every family member I could think of, including aunts, uncles, and my grandma. Everyone is telling me that some variation of Daniel is your brother. You can't just let him fail like this, and don't sacrifice family for money. No one addressed my graduation. Not one. The problem was, I hadn't even turned them down because of the money. I had said no because I was exhausted. I'm tired of being a safety net for a man who has never learned to stand on his own 2 feet. I'm tired of being invisible until they need me. And the more they pressed, the more I knew they didn't regard me as a member of the family in the same way they did Daniel. I was a resource, and a tool. What I didn't realize was that their pressure campaign was only getting started. The texts, calls, and subtle digs were all leading up to something much bigger, something they believed they could force me into. And they had no idea that as they pushed, I began to plan how I would push back. It wouldn't be long until they offered me the perfect justification, and once they did, there was no turning back. It was a peaceful Thursday morning when the actual blow came. I had just completed sending out a couple job applications for roles I'd been fantasizing of since college, when I received a call from my bank. The woman on the other end was courteous, but anxious. Mr. Rivers, I just wanted to confirm a large transfer request we received from your account earlier today. I sat up straighter. Transfer request? I haven't authorized anything. She read off the details. Nearly $4,800 will be wired to a joint account in Daniel's name. My stomach sank. Cancel it, I said quickly. That's what I thought, she answered. It was initiated online from an IP address registered at your parents' home. I didn't need a detective to put things together. My parents kept my old banking login from when I was in high school, and they insisted on keeping a check on things to ensure I didn't overspend. I had never updated the password since I trusted them not to use it without my permission. I suppose that faith was misplaced. I hung up the phone shaking, not from anger, but from the calm, bone-deep understanding that they had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. This was not a request for help. This was not even a guilt trip. This was stealing, pure and simple. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about how they felt entitled to take from me without asking, because in their opinion, it wasn't my mine to begin with. Before I could decide what to do next, my phone rang again. This time, Daniel texted, "Thanks for covering it, man. I'll repay you when I can." A winking emoji followed, as if it were a friendly joke between brothers. I didn't respond. My hands were too tight around the phone, white knuckles. I recalled every instance in which they had made me feel insignificant. Every time my accomplishments were overlooked. Every time I was told to be the bigger person, whereas Daniel got away with anything. It was evident that they didn't expect me to just pick up the pieces when he made a mistake. They felt I owed it to him. I called my mother. She responded cheerfully, as if nothing were wrong. "Rob, we were just talking about you. You should come by this weekend." "Did you authorize a transfer from my account?" I inquired, my tone colder than intended. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone perplexed, but the pause of someone deciding what reason to offer. "Oh, sweetheart, we knew you'd help your brother. He's in a tight spot, and we didn't want to bother you with the details while you were busy with school things." "You stole from me," I replied. Her tone sharpened immediately. "Don't be dramatic. We're family. It's not stealing when it's for someone you love." Something inside of me moved when I heard those words. For years, I allowed that perverted definition of love define how I was treated. But it struck me at that very time. Their idea of love was simply a term they used to justify taking anything they desired from me. I hung up before she could continue. The silence in my flat felt piercing, like if it had edges. My diploma was still lying against the wall where I had left it after graduation, unframed and unopened. As I glanced at it, I understood it was more than simply a piece of paper. It was proof. Proof that I had created something for myself despite them, despite being repeatedly disregarded, and despite being treated as a backup plan for their beloved kid. That night, I updated all of my passwords, including bank accounts and email. And as I did, I reflected about the 37 missed calls on graduation day, how they had made my milestone about Daniel's ski trip, and their entitled notion that my hard-earned money was theirs to take. They'd taken the opening shot. They made it plain that they would not respect any boundaries I placed, and I had a feeling they expected me to rage quietly before forgiving them as usual. They were mistaken because this time, they didn't only injure me. They'd given me a cause, the ideal reason to finally cease playing the character they'd assigned me. And, in the coming days, that rationale would serve as fuel for something unexpected. What I didn't realize was how far they were willing to push me before I acted. But I was going to find out. The next few weeks were like navigating through thick fog. I went through the motions, sending out job applications and attending a few interviews. But my mind was elsewhere. Every time I opened my banking app, I expected to see something more missing. I kept my phone on mute because I couldn't handle the incessant buzzing from family members, each with their own gentle reminder to let things go for the sake of family harmony. The story they were promoting was expected. Daniel was stressed. Daniel was suffering. Daniel did not aim to cause any harm. I was the chilly one for causing a fuss about it. The robbery had been reframed as a misunderstanding, and my resistance to give in was fueled by a grudge. It was surreal. I wanted to shout every time someone told me I was acting unfairly, but I didn't. I did not give them the satisfaction of hearing my frustration. Instead, I pulled back. I stopped attending Sunday dinners. I stopped answering phone calls unless they were from numbers I didn't recognize, in which case it was a job offer. I stopped checking the family group chat completely. When I eventually opened it one night out of morbid curiosity, I discovered a series of images from the ski trip. Daniel poses with his friends, holding champagne. There were laughing emojis and statements about enjoying life to the fullest. My graduation? Not a single photograph. Not one word. That hit harder than I'd like to admit. For years I tried to convince myself that if I worked hard enough and accomplished enough, they would perceive me differently, that they'd be as proud as they were of Daniel. But the truth was right in front of me. I could cure a sickness, but they'd still make it about him. My finances were tight right now. Graduation had already drained the majority of my savings, application fees, rent, and basic living expenses. And while the bank had reversed the transfer before it went through, there were still processing costs and a hold on my account for several days. I had to get by with what I had left. I skipped more meals than I cared to confess. My apartment felt colder and emptier. It was the first time in years that I felt completely alone. Not only are you alone, but you also lack the illusion of being supported. What is the worst part? My degree should have led to opportunities, but without any actual connections or family support, I was simply another resume in a pile. Every rejection letters was a reminder that I was now on my own, that if I fell, no one would catch me. Unless catching me implied stealing something from me. But here's the deal. In that silence, that isolation, a part of me began to awaken. I started keeping a tiny notepad beside my bed, recording everything that had happened since graduation. Every call, text, and manipulation. I began to reflect on the past, noting down instances that I had previously dismissed. When I read it all together, it was like watching a slow-moving train wreck. Patterns that I had previously ignored were now clear. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I knew I wasn't going to react on instinct anymore. I would not yell, I would not plead, I wouldn't try to persuade them to my side. That had never worked, and it never will. Instead, I planned to wait and watch while they continued to reveal me who they were. And when the time came, I'd have more than simply the determination to defend myself. I would have a plan. The thing was, they hadn't finished with me yet. And before I could put that plan into action, they were going to drive me further than I'd ever imagined. Far enough that I'd be forced to act. At first, the transformation was barely perceptible. I got a part-time research assistant position at a local firm. It didn't pay much, but it offered me enough money to cover rent without depleting my savings. More significantly, it was a foot in the door, a place where my abilities were valued and my work was not always overshadowed by someone else's appeal. My supervisor, Karen, complimented my report writing talents in front of the entire team, and I had no idea how to respond. I wasn't used to receiving public recognition that wasn't immediately followed by a "but Daniel" statement. Nobody compared me to a golden boy. Nobody discounted what I had done. I showed up, worked hard, and people noticed. It was odd and intoxicating in its own subtle way. Within 2 months, the part-time job had become full-time. I was now earning enough to not only cover my expenditures, but also to begin rebuilding my savings. I updated my wardrobe with a few professional outfits. I began eating better, getting back in shape, and even joined a co-worker for early morning runs in the park. For the first time in a long time, I awoke each day feeling like my life was genuinely moving forward, without my family's permission or involvement at all. The social transformation occurred next. Derek, one of my co-workers, invited me to a young professional networking event. I almost did not go. The concept of networking made me think of phony grins and shallow chats. But I went anyhow, and to my amazement, I met people who were genuinely interested in what I did and the goals I was pursuing. In the following weeks, I made relationships, exchanged contact information, and even began attending industry mixers. It wasn't an overnight success, but it was consistent, clear growth. And the best part? My family had no idea. I did not make a post about it. I did not send updates. I learned to enjoy the solitude. Every accomplishment seemed like a card I was holding face down on the table, waiting for the ideal moment to turn it over. Financially, I began to pull ahead. By month 4, I had paid off the little debt from my final semester of school. By month 6, I had a growing emergency fund. Around the same time, Karen recommended me for a side consulting job with a startup. It was only a few hours per week, but the pay was more than generous, and it allowed me to practice abilities I hadn't used since my senior thesis. That gig led to another, and before long, I was earning more on the side than I did at my previous full-time job. I knew the version of me they were used to, the silent helper who says yes because it was simpler than fighting, would never have gotten this far. This was uncharted territory. I wasn't simply surviving anymore, I was gaining leverage. Still, I kept my cards near. When my mother called to see if I was doing well financially, I gave her the most generic answer possible. I'm fine. There were no details, no opportunities for them to assess how much they could handle. The less they knew, the fewer targets they could choose. But Daniel could not help himself. He began sending me casual messages again. How are things doing at work, man? Have any plans for the weekend? I realized what it was. A test of the waters. He'd done it previously after our disagreements, gradually returning to my life until he could beg for something. This time, I did not bite. I gave brief, courteous responses, nothing more. Nonetheless, I sensed something was stirring. Call it instinct. Call it years of observing how my family functioned. Their occasional texts had changed tone, polite, even kind, but with a staged quality. I wasn't sure what they wanted yet, but I could guess. Money, favors, or anything that benefited Daniel at my expense. They didn't know they were no longer dealing with the same person. I wasn't the broke, dependent college student they could manipulate with guilt trips. I had resources. I had contacts. And for the first time in my life, I had the ability to say no, and have it stay. Still, I did not move first. I knew if I waited, they'd give me the perfect opportunity. They always have. And when that time came, I wouldn't just say no. I'd make it apparent to them in a way they couldn't ignore. The old version of me was gone for good. The moment I had been waiting for was closer than I expected, and when it happened, it was bigger and uglier than I could have imagined. It occurred on a rainy Tuesday evening, 6 months after I graduated. I was just leaving the workplace when my phone rang with an unknown number. The person on the other end presented himself as Mr. Carter, a senior partner in a medium-sized investment firm. "Rob, I've heard good things about you," he added, his tone professional. "Karen speaks highly of your work, and Derek mentioned you're excellent with financial structuring. We could use someone like you for a project we're taking on." I'd learned to put my excitement at bay, so I listened intently. The project turned out to be a complete portfolio restructuring for a local chain of boutique hotels. It wasn't simply a job, it was an opportunity to work directly with high-net-worth clientele and get my name in rooms I didn't even know existed a year ago. The sum they gave for my role exceeded my monthly wage at my usual job. I said yes. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in the task. It was demanding. Late evenings, numerous spreadsheets, and regular strategy meetings. But I was in my element. My input began to affect decisions. Jonathan Reeves, the chain's owner, took note. "You're not just good with numbers," he told me one evening during dinner with the project team. "You understand how people think. That's rare." I had no idea at the time, but Jonathan would prove to be one of the most valuable relationships I'd ever made. He had strong ties to the local business sector and was well known in circles that my family could only dream of entering. Throughout all of this, I was accumulating information. Not because I was deliberately plotting revenge, but because old habits die hard. I'd been keeping that journal updated with every petty comment from my family, every manipulative attempt, and every subtle investigation into my finances. But now, I had something extra. Through casual talks with family friends at networking events, it's surprising what people will share over a glass of wine. I discovered that Daniel had been attempting, but failing, to secure funding for a business venture. Apparently he offered a half-baked plan for a luxury sports club to numerous investors, but none of them would touch it. One remark stayed with me. "If he doesn't get someone to co-sign a loan soon, he's doomed. Your parents are quite concerned about it." I filed that away in the back of my mind. I knew my family well enough to notice the pattern emerging. At some point, they'd try to offer this sports bar as a family opportunity, twisting it as a way for me to help my brother's future. They'd press hard, present it as an investment, and possibly even try to guilt me by claiming it would bring the family together. And they'd presume I didn't realize how horrible Daniel's condition was. Meanwhile, my own standing steadily improved. When the hotel project was completed, Jonathan drew me aside. "You ever thought about starting your own consulting business? You've got the skills, and I've got contacts who'd hire you tomorrow." The concept sparked something in me. Within a month, I had completed the paperwork for my own little business. It was still just me and a laptop in my flat, but I had my first 2 clients before I completed building the website. By the conclusion of that quarter, I'd earned more than I had in a full year at my previous employment. I did not brag. I did not even hint about it to my relatives. I pretended I was still working a low-wage office job to survive. Every time Mom inquired, "How's work?" I'd respond with a vague, "Busy, but good," and shift the subject. The less they knew, the better. In private, however, I was working on something that would give me true power. Not only money, but choices. Options for saying no without fear. Options for walking away without losing anything. Options for fighting back if they crossed me again. And sure enough, that time arrived one Sunday afternoon, when I received an unexpected family dinner invitation. There is no justification given, only that we would love to see you. My instinct told me it wasn't about catching up. This was the setup. I was expecting it. What I didn't realize at the time was how far they were ready to go in order to entice me, or how flawlessly their plan would set up mine. On that Sunday evening, I strolled inside my parents' house with the peace that comes from knowing the finish of a narrative. The smell of Mom's roast chicken wafted from the kitchen, but the atmosphere in the living room was rigid and overly rehearsed. Dad sat in his recliner, hands folded, as if he were hosting a board meeting. Daniel sat on the couch, leaning back nonchalantly, but his eyes were a touch too bright. After the customary perfunctory greetings, Mom poured me a drink of water and added, "We're so glad you could make it. There's something exciting we want to talk about. A family opportunity." I nearly smiled. There it was. Daniel delivered his pitch, complete with printed brochures and a laptop presentation. He discussed the future sports bar, with high-end decor and specialty cocktails, as well as exclusive agreements with local breweries. He utilized terms like ground floor opportunity and guaranteed return. I listened, nodded periodically, and avoided interrupting. When he was finished, Mom leaned in with an expectant smile. "We've already got interest from a few investors, but we'd love to keep it in the family. We thought you could come in as a primary backer. It would be such a great way to bond." "Really?" I asked, maintaining a bland tone. "And how much are we talking about?" Daniel did not flinch. "150,000 to start. But you'd own 30%, huge upside, man." I placed down my glass and leaned forward slightly. "That's a big ask. So, just out of curiosity, have you told all your potential investors about the loan rejections?" The room became still. Daniel's smile wavered. "What?" "I mean the ones from First State Bank, Harborview Capital, and Westline Financial, the three that turned you down because your projections didn't add up." I kept my voice steady, but I noticed Mom's gaze shift to Dad. I just wouldn't want anyone to feel like they weren't getting the full picture. Daniel's jaws constricted. "I don't know where you're getting your..." I brushed him off with a shrug. "People talk, especially in business circles, and I happen to run in a few now." Dad attempted to salvage the moment. "Rob, this is your brother's dream. You're in a good position now. You could really help." That was my cue. I removed a folder from my backpack and placed it on the coffee table. Inside was a polished bound copy of my firm's portfolio, including clients, contracts, and revenue estimates. All authentic and impressive. "You're right," I replied. "I am in a good position. Good enough to know this isn't an investment, it's a bailout." Daniel's face turned red. Mom's mouth opened, and then closed again. "And here's the thing," I explained, my tone remaining cool. "I don't invest in people who steal from me. And before you say it wasn't stealing, let me remind you. I spoke to the bank. I know exactly who tried to pull money from my account after graduation." That landed like a stone in the water. Nobody moved. I stood and tucked the folder back into my bag. "From now on, I'm done being your safety net. I'm not your investor, your ATM, or your fallback plan. Whatever hole you've dug, you can climb out of it yourselves." I proceeded toward the door before pausing and turning back just long enough to twist the knife. "Oh, and Jonathan Reeves? He's a friend now. His company owns 3 of the city's busiest bars. When your pitch crosses his desk, and it will, you can guess how that'll go." Daniel didn't say anything. Mom seemed to want to speak, but Dad's hand on her arm kept her silent. I went without saying anything else, the rain outside sounding lighter than it had when I arrived. They'd come expecting the same old Rob, the one they could coerce into giving in. Instead, they received the version they had spent years developing without realizing it. The one who had figured out how to beat them at their own game. What I didn't realize until later was how terribly that one evening would unravel things for them. The consequences came faster than I had anticipated. 2 weeks after that supper, I received a text from an old neighbor. "Hey, just saw your brother at the bank." He looked enraged. "Did something happen?" That following day, I received an email from Jonathan Reeves that confirmed my suspicion. Daniel had indeed sent him a sports bar proposal. Jonathan hadn't simply declined. He had forwarded it to a few other major investors in the city, along with a brief professional note, "Not financially solid. Proceed with caution." Daniel's ground floor opportunity was over in a matter of days. Word spreads rapidly in small company networks, and his name became synonymous with overpromising and underdelivering. Every lead had dried up. No bank would accept his calls. No investor wanted to meet. That alone would have been plenty. My parents' reaction, however, clinched the deal. Mom called me late one night, her voice tight. "Do you know what you've done? Your brother's future is ruined. We had to take out a line of credit on the house to cover his debts." I kept my voice even. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices." There was silence on the line. I could practically hear her swallowing everything she wanted to say. She eventually spoke, softly but coldly. "You've changed." "Yes," I answered. "I have." I hung up. Over the next month, I maintained my distance. My consulting firm expanded, and I relocated to a larger downtown apartment with a skyline view that I'd desired since my freshman year of college. The few mutual friends I still had with my family started to quietly admit what I'd always known. The golden boy luster had worn off, and the cracks were visible. Daniel had gotten into conflicts with numerous of them following his failing business, blaming the market, bad timing, and even me. But nobody was buying it. I last saw him by accident. I was meeting a customer for lunch when Daniel strolled past the restaurant. He observed me through the window, slowed for a second, and continued going. No grin, no wave, just a man who'd learned the person he used to rely on had vanished for good. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel guilty. I felt free. Because they had taught me, in their own way, the most important thing I'd ever learned. When you stop allowing people to treat you as a safety net, you'll quickly discover who is capable of standing on their own.